The sound of sandpaper against oak was the only thing keeping me sane at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. My workshop smelled like sawdust and disappointment, which seemed fitting, given how my life was turning out these days. I'd been restoring my grandfather's antique desk, the one piece of furniture in this house that still had some dignity left. That's when I heard Talia's voice drifting through the thin walls, sharp and cutting like always, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Of course I won't take his last name permanently, she was saying into her phone. Grant, it sounds so blue-collar, so cheap. I'd rather stay Talia Sloan forever than be stuck with Grant for the rest of my life. I stopped sanding. The workshop went silent except for the hum of the space heater in the corner. Drew, you know I only married him for stability. But now that your business is taking off, maybe it's time to make some changes. Drew Franklin. My former best friend who'd been coming around the house more often lately, always with some excuse about business opportunities and networking events. The same Drew who drove a flashy Tesla and wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I set down the sandpaper and moved closer to the wall that separated my workshop from the kitchen. Talia's voice was clearer now, and every word hit like a hammer to the chest. He's so proud of that stupid Grant name, his grandfather's legacy, his family tradition. God, it's embarrassing when I have to introduce myself at client events. Hi, I'm Talia Grant. It makes me sound like I should be serving coffee instead of planning million-dollar weddings. Good thing I hadn't gotten around to embroidering her initials on those anniversary towels I'd been planning, though at this point, the only thing she deserved embroidered was a scarlet letter. I grabbed my phone and opened the calculator app. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of building a life together in this rundown neighborhood that used to be prosperous back when my grandfather first bought this house. 15 years of her complaining about money while I worked 16-hour days building custom furniture for rich clients who appreciated craftsmanship. The workshop takes up half the basement, she continued. Can you imagine what we could do with that space? Maybe turn it into a proper home office for my event planning business. Somewhere classy, you know? Not filled with all those dusty old tools and wood shavings. Those dusty old tools had been passed down through 3 generations of Grant men. They'd built half the original houses in this neighborhood back in the 1940s, but apparently legacy didn't mean much to a woman who thought my last name sounded cheap. I heard her laugh, that fake tinkling sound she used with clients and people she wanted to impress. You're right, we should meet tomorrow. The usual place? Perfect. And Drew? Thanks for being so patient with all this. I know it's complicated, but I think I'm finally ready to make some real changes. The call ended, and I heard her heels clicking across the kitchen floor toward the stairs. Probably going up to our bedroom, the bedroom where I'd been sleeping on the couch more often than not lately because she needed space to think about her business expansion. I looked around my workshop, really looked at it. The workbench my grandfather had built with his own hands, the hand planes that still worked better than any modern tool, the half-finished rocking chair I'd been making for our daughter Maddie's 18th birthday next month. Everything covered in a fine layer of sawdust that told the story of decades of honest work. Cheap, that's what she thought of it all. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through our text messages from the past few weeks. Now that I knew what to look for, the signs were everywhere. The late nights at client meetings, the new clothes she couldn't afford on her event planning salary, the way she'd started doing her hair differently, wearing perfume I'd never smelled before, and Maddie. Our daughter had been distant lately, cold toward me in a way that felt deliberate. Always taking her mother's side in arguments, rolling her eyes when I talked about the family business or tried to share stories about her great-grandfather's craftsmanship. I opened our joint bank account on my phone and started scrolling through recent transactions. There it was, a charge from the Riverside Inn last Thursday afternoon. The same day Talia had told me she was meeting with a bride about a lakeside wedding. The same day I'd been stuck at the Hendersons' house installing their custom kitchen cabinets until 8 o'clock. My hands were shaking as I scrolled further. More hotel charges, restaurants I'd never been to, a jewelry store purchase for $300, definitely not the anniversary earrings I'd received last month from the discount store downtown. The workshop door creaked, and I looked up to see our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, peering through the small window, her face pressed against the glass like she was watching a soap opera. This woman had made neighborhood gossip into an art form, and she had a Ring doorbell that captured everything happening on our street. I waved at her sarcastically, and she disappeared from the window like a guilty teenager. My phone buzzed with a text message. From Maddie. Mom says you've been acting weird lately. Maybe you should talk to someone about your anger issues. Anger issues? Right? Because discovering your wife thinks your family name is cheap and is apparently having an affair with your former best friend is something you should just smile and accept. I typed back, "Just working late in the shop. Nothing weird about a man working to support his family." Her response came immediately. "Whatever, Dad. Just don't take it out on Mom. She's been stressed enough with her business expansion." Business expansion. Is that what they were calling it? I walked over to the small window and looked out at the street. Drew's Tesla was parked 3 houses down, right where it had been every Tuesday night for the past month. I'd thought he was visiting the Kramers. They were always having financial problems, and Drew had positioned himself as some kind of business consultant for struggling families. But now I realized he wasn't visiting the Kramers at all. He was parking far enough away that I wouldn't immediately notice, then walking back to meet Talia somewhere. Probably at that coffee shop on Maple Street where she claimed to meet with clients. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. If Drew wanted to play games with my marriage, maybe it was time to change the rules. The night air was cold and sharp, cutting through my jacket as I walked down the street toward his car. The Tesla sat there gleaming under the streetlight, all sleek lines and expensive curves. Just like Drew himself, all surface shine with nothing substantial underneath. I circled the car slowly, noting the custom license plate that read Success and the leather interior that probably cost more than most people's entire cars. This was what Talia wanted. This was what she thought was better than a man who worked with his hands and took pride in building things that lasted. That's when I saw them. Drew and Talia were sitting in a booth at Murphy's Diner, the 24-hour place on the edge of town where truckers stopped for coffee and people went when they didn't want to be seen. They were leaning across the table toward each other, her hand covering his, both of them laughing like teenagers on a first date. I stood outside the window for a full minute, watching my wife of 15 years flirt with the man who used to be my closest friend. Drew was wearing one of his expensive suits even at midnight, his hair perfectly styled, his teeth unnaturally white when he smiled. Talia had changed out of the sweatpants she'd been wearing at home and was now dressed in the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. She never wore that dress for me anymore. I pushed through the diner door, the little bell announcing my arrival with a cheerful ding that felt completely inappropriate for the moment. The night shift waitress looked up from her crossword puzzle, and I saw her eyes widen as she recognized the drama about to unfold. "Well, well," I said, walking slowly toward their booth. "Business meeting running a little late, aren't we?" Talia's face went white, then red, then white again. Drew had the decency to look embarrassed for about half a second before his salesman's smile kicked in. "Elias, hey buddy." Drew stood up and extended his hand like we were meeting at a barbecue. What a coincidence. Talia and I were just discussing some marketing strategies for her event planning business. I looked at their hands, still intertwined on the table. "Marketing strategies? Right. Is that what you call holding hands with married women these days?" "Dad?" I turned around to see Maddie standing in the doorway, her face a mixture of confusion and horror. She was wearing her pajamas under a winter coat, her hair messy like she'd been sleeping. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Mom texted me that you'd left the house angry, and she was worried about you. She said you might do something stupid." Maddie's eyes moved from me to her mother to Drew, and I watched her piece together what was happening. "Oh my God." "Honey, it's not what it looks like," Talia started, but Maddie held up her hand. "Actually, Mom, it's exactly what it looks like." My daughter's voice was quiet but steady. "How long has this been going on?" The diner had gone completely silent. Even the cook had stopped flipping burgers to watch the show. Drew cleared his throat and sat back down, apparently deciding that standing wasn't helping his case. "Maddie, sweetheart," Drew said in his smooth business voice. "Adults sometimes have complicated relationships that—" "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't you dare try to explain adult relationships to my daughter while you're sitting there holding my wife's hand." "Your wife and I are friends, Elias. We've been discussing business opportunities and—" "At midnight, in a diner, holding hands." "Right." I slid into the booth across from them, forcing Maddie to sit next to me. "Tell me more about these business opportunities, Drew. Are they the kind that require hotel rooms at the Riverside Inn?" Talia's face went pale again. "How did you—" "Joint bank account, sweetheart. Remember, the one where I can see every charge you make with our credit card." I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the transactions. Let's see. Riverside Inn and $300 last Thursday. Antonio's Restaurant, $150 last Saturday. That's funny, because I was working that day and you said you were home with Maddie. Oh, and here's my favorite. Tiffany's Jewelry Store, $300 last Monday. I looked at Drew's wrist and saw a new watch that definitely hadn't been there the last time I'd seen him. Nice watch, by the way. Looks expensive. Drew instinctively covered the watch with his other hand. This was a business investment. Image is important in my line of work. Your line of work. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Remind me again what exactly you do for a living. Because last I heard, you were selling insurance. Before that, it was real estate. Before that, you were going to revolutionize the restaurant industry with some app that never got off the ground. I'm a business consultant now, Drew said stiffly. I help people maximize their potential and... You help married women maximize their potential by taking them to hotels and buying them jewelry? Maddie interrupted. Her voice was getting louder, and I could see she was fighting back tears. Mom, how could you do this to Dad? To our family? Talia finally found her voice. Maddie, you don't understand. Your father and I have been growing apart for years. We want different things. He's content to stay in that old house, working in his little workshop, never wanting to improve or grow or... Or what? I leaned forward. Build a business that actually makes money? Support my family? Take pride in honest work? Honest work. Talia's voice was bitter now. Elias, you make furniture. Custom furniture for rich people who can afford to pay premium prices for handmade tables and chairs. But we still live in your grandfather's old house in a neighborhood that's falling apart. We still drive cars that are 10 years old. We still shop at discount stores while I watch my clients spend more on their wedding flowers than we spend on groceries in a year. So you decided to upgrade to Drew here. I gestured toward him. Tell me, Drew, what's your annual income these days? Because I'm curious what my wife thinks she's trading up to. Drew straightened his tie. I don't think that's relevant to... Humor me, because see, I made $87,000 last year building furniture. Not bad for a guy with cheap hands and a cheap last name, right? So what's a successful business consultant like yourself pulling in? The silence stretched out for a long moment. Finally, Drew said, Business consulting is more about long-term growth potential than immediate income. That's a fancy way of saying you're broke, isn't it? Maddie was staring at her mother with an expression I'd never seen before. Mom, you're leaving Dad for someone who doesn't even have a real job. Drew has big plans, Talia said defensively. He's working on several major projects that are going to... Let me guess, I interrupted. He's got investors lined up. Big deals in the works. Just needs a little more time to put all the pieces together. Am I close? Drew's jaw tightened. You wouldn't understand, Elias. You're satisfied with small thinking. Building one table at a time, one chair at a time, never dreaming bigger than your grandfather's workshop. My grandfather's workshop built half the houses in this neighborhood. Those houses are still standing 70 years later. How many of your big projects are still around after 70 years, Drew? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. I stood up, and Drew instinctively leaned back. My grandfather built things that lasted. I build things that last. You? You jump from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, leaving a trail of disappointed investors and broken promises. And now you want to add my wife to that list. Dad, Maddie said quietly, maybe we should just go home. In a minute, honey. I looked at Talia, really looked at her. 15 years. We've been married for 15 years. I've supported your business, encouraged your dreams, worked extra hours to pay for your marketing courses and your networking events and your professional wardrobe. And this is what I get in return? You think my last name is cheap? Talia's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were from guilt or frustration. Elias, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You want a different life. You want a husband who drives a Tesla and wears expensive suits and talks about big deals and long-term growth potential. You want someone who sounds impressive at your client events. I pulled out my wallet and threw a $20 bill on the table. Here's the thing, though. Drew doesn't have a Tesla. He leases it. Drew doesn't own those expensive suits. He puts them on credit cards that he can barely make minimum payments on. And those big deals he's always talking about, they exist only in his imagination. Drew started to protest, but I held up my hand. I know this because 3 months ago, you came to me asking for a loan to bridge a temporary cash flow situation. Remember that, buddy? You needed $5,000 to keep your business consulting firm afloat until your next big client came through. The color drained from Drew's face. I said no, because I had a feeling that big client was never coming. Looks like I was right. I looked at Talia. So congratulations, sweetheart. You're trading a husband who owns his home, his business, and his cars outright for a man who can't even afford to pay his own rent without help. I stood up and held out my hand to Maddie. Come on, honey, let's go home. But as we reached the door, Drew called out, At least I have ambition, Elias. At least I'm not content to spend my whole life hiding in a workshop, playing with wood and tools like some kind of overgrown child. I stopped walking. I turned around slowly, and something in my expression made Drew shrink back into the booth. "What did you just say?" I said. "I heard what you said." I walked back to their table, and this time Drew didn't try to stand up. "You think working with my hands makes me a child. You think building something real, something that lasts, something that people can use and enjoy for decades, you think that's childish?" "That's not what I meant." "No, I think it's exactly what you meant. Because you've never built anything in your life, have you, Drew? You've never created something from raw materials and your own skill and knowledge. You've never had the satisfaction of seeing a customer's face light up when they see the finished product you made for them." I leaned down so we were eye level. "You know what's childish? Jumping from one fantasy business to another because you're too lazy to learn a real skill, buying things you can't afford to impress people you don't even like, seducing other men's wives because you can't find a woman who wants to build a life with you from scratch." "Elias, that's enough," Talia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Because I'm just getting started." I sat back down across from them. "Maddie, did you know that Drew here has been married twice before?" My daughter's eyes widened. "What?" "Oh, yes. First wife left him when she found out he'd been lying about his income and had run up $50,000 in credit card debt. Second wife lasted 8 months before she discovered he was still married to wife number 1. Drew's face was red now. "That's not... Those situations were complicated." "Bigamy tends to be complicated, yes." I looked at Talia. "Did he mention that part when he was telling you about his big plans for the future?" "You're lying," Talia said, but she was looking at Drew with uncertainty now. "Am I? Drew, why don't you tell my wife about the restraining order your second wife took out against you, or the small claims court judgments from the 3 investors you scammed with your restaurant app?" The diner was completely silent now. Even the cook had come out of the kitchen to listen. Drew was opening and closing his mouth like a fish, no words coming out. "How do you know all this?" Talia asked. "Because unlike some people, I do my research before I trust someone with important things, like my friendship or my family." I pulled out my phone. "It's amazing what you can find with a simple background check. Public records, court documents, bankruptcy filings." I scrolled through the screenshots I'd taken. Drew Franklin, also known as Andrew Franklin, also known as Andy Franklin, apparently he changes his name depending on which business venture he's promoting, currently owes $43,000 in back taxes, has been evicted from his last 2 apartments, and his business consulting license was revoked in Ohio for fraudulent practices. Maddie was staring at her mother in disbelief. "Mom, you checked out Dad's friend?" I checked him out after he started coming around so much, asking about our finances and our business. I wanted to make sure he wasn't planning to scam us. I looked at Talia. Turns out I was right to be suspicious, just wrong about his target. Drew finally found his voice. "Elias, you don't understand the whole situation. I understand that you're a con man who saw an opportunity to manipulate a woman who was feeling underappreciated in her marriage. I understand that you've been filling her head with fantasies about a better life while you're living in a studio apartment and driving a car you can't afford. The Tesla is leased under a business name that doesn't exist anymore. I called the dealership." I stood up again. "Here's what's going to happen, Drew. You're going to stay away from my wife. You're going to stay away from my daughter. You're going to stay away from my house and my neighborhood and my family." "You can't tell me where I can go?" "Actually, I can, because I also called your probation officer." The words hit Drew like a physical blow. His face went white, and he gripped the edge of the table. "Probation officer?" Talia whispered. "Didn't mention that either, did he? Drew here is on probation for wire fraud in connection with an investment scheme he ran in Michigan. Part of his probation terms include not engaging in any business activities that involve handling other people's money or assets." I smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I'm pretty sure seducing married women to get access to their joint bank accounts would violate those terms." Drew was already reaching for his phone. "I need to make a call." "No, you need to leave, now. And if I see you anywhere near my family again, I'll be making some calls of my own." Drew scrambled out of the booth, threw some money on the table, and headed for the door without another word. We watched through the window as he got into his Tesla and drove away, tires squealing on the wet pavement. The diner was still silent. Talia was staring at her hands, tears running down her cheeks. Maddie was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. "Mom?" Maddie said finally. "Is this why you've been so weird lately? Why you've been turning me against Dad?" Talia looked up, her makeup smeared. "I haven't been turning you against anyone." "Yes, you have. All those comments about Dad's anger issues and his lack of ambition and how he's holding you back. All those times you rolled your eyes when he tried to tell me stories about Great-Grandpa's workshop or the family business." Maddie's voice was getting stronger. You made me think Dad was the problem. Your father is a good man, Talia said quietly, but we want different things. You want things we can't afford, and instead of appreciating what we have, you decided to find someone who would promise you more. I sat back down next to Maddie. The problem is, Drew can't deliver on those promises any more than he could deliver on all his business ventures. Talia wiped her eyes with a napkin. So what happens now? Now you decide what you really want. Do you want a marriage with a man who loves you and works hard to provide for his family? Or do you want to keep chasing fantasies with men who make big promises they can't keep? And if I choose wrong? I looked at my daughter, who was watching both of us with an expression far too mature for her 18 years. Then Maddie and I will build a life without you. The Grant name has survived worse than a woman who thinks it sounds cheap. Talia flinched like I'd slapped her. Dad, Maddie said softly, maybe we should all go home and talk about this when we're not so emotional. Your daughter's right, the waitress called out from behind the counter. Y'all need to take this family drama somewhere private before I have to call the police. I stood up and pulled out my wallet again, leaving enough money to cover everyone's coffee and a generous tip. Sorry for the disturbance. Honey, the waitress said, I've been married 32 years. Trust me, this ain't the worst family drama I've seen play out in here. But your daughter's got a good head on her shoulders. Listen to her. As we walked toward the door, Talia grabbed my arm. Elias, I'm sorry. I know I've made mistakes, but nothing. You made choices, Talia. You chose to believe a con man over your husband. You chose to spend our money on hotels and gifts for another man. You chose to poison our daughter against me. I gently removed her hand from my arm. Now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. Outside, the night air felt even colder than before. Maddie walked between Talia and me, her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets. Are you guys getting divorced? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. That depends on your mother. What do you mean? I stopped walking and looked at both of them. I mean, your mother needs to decide if she wants to be married to me or if she wants to keep looking for something better. But I'm not going to compete with fantasies and promises and con men anymore. I chose you 15 years ago, Talia said. No, you chose stability 15 years ago. You chose a man who could provide for you and give you a comfortable life, but that's not the same thing as choosing me. We reached our cars. Talia had driven separately to meet Drew, another lie in a growing collection of deceptions. She stood next to her 10-year-old Honda, looking small and defeated. I do love you, she said. I know I've been stupid and selfish, and you think my last name sounds cheap? She winced. You heard that. I heard everything. The phone call, the complaints about my workshop, the embarrassment you feel when you have to introduce yourself as Mrs. Grant at your fancy client events. Elias? Go home, Talia. Think about whether you can live with being married to a man whose name embarrasses you. Think about whether you can be happy with a husband who works with his hands instead of making big promises about future success. I opened the passenger door of my truck for Maddie. And think about whether you want to rebuild the trust you've broken, or if you'd rather keep looking for someone who can give you the life you think you deserve. As we drove home, Maddie was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, Dad, I'm sorry I believed all the things Mom said about you. I should have known better. You shouldn't have been put in the middle of this at all. That's not your fault. Are you really going to divorce her? I thought about it as we pulled into our driveway. The house looked the same as always, a solid, well-built structure that had weathered 70 years of storms and still stood strong, like the Grant name itself. I don't know, honey, but I'm not going to stay married to someone who's ashamed of who I am and what I do for a living, and I'm not going to pretend that what happened tonight is something we can just forget about. What if she promises to change? What if she says she's sorry and wants to work things out? Then we'll see if her actions match her words. But Maddie, I need you to understand something. Your mother didn't just have an affair. She made me the villain in our marriage. She made you think I was the problem. She was ready to throw away 15 years of marriage for a man who turned out to be a criminal. I know, and I'm sorry I believed her. Don't apologize for trusting your mother, but don't forget what you learned tonight either. As we walked toward the house, I saw Mrs. Patterson's curtains twitch. By tomorrow morning, the whole neighborhood would know about tonight's drama. In a way, that was fitting. If Talia was embarrassed by the Grant name, she was about to find out what real embarrassment felt like. But as I opened the front door and looked around at the home my grandfather had built, the workshop where 3 generations of Grant men had learned their trade, and the daughter who carried that legacy in her veins, I realized something important. I wasn't embarrassed by who I was at all, and it was time to make sure everyone else knew it too. The next morning, I woke up on the couch in my workshop. I'd spent the night there after Talia and I had another fight when we got home, this one loud enough that I was sure Mrs. Patterson had heard every word through her open bedroom window. Talia had alternated between tearful apologies and angry justifications, while I'd mostly just listened and tried to figure out if there was anything left of our marriage worth saving. My phone was buzzing with text messages, 3 from my brother Mike in Portland, 2 from my sister Jenny in Chicago, and 1 from my mother in Florida. Apparently news of last night's diner confrontation had already made it through the family grapevine. Mike's message was typical. Heard about Talia and that Drew guy. Want me to come kick his ass? Jenny was more practical. Called Mom. She's worried. Call her. Also lawyer up. Mom's message was pure maternal concern. Honey, are you okay? Do you need me to come stay with you and Maddie? I appreciated the support, but this was something I needed to handle myself. I texted them all back with the same message. I'm fine, taking care of it. We'll call later. The workshop door opened, and Maddie came in carrying 2 cups of coffee and a plate of toast. She'd gotten dressed for school, but her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. Mom's still in bed, she said, setting the coffee down on my workbench. She says she's too sick to go to work today. Probably for the best. She's got some thinking to do. Maddie sat down on the old wooden stool next to my workbench, the same stool I'd sat on as a kid when my dad taught me how to use his tools. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you ever tell me about Drew's background? If you knew he was a con man, why did you let him keep coming around? I sipped my coffee and thought about how to answer that. Because I didn't want to be the paranoid husband who investigated his wife's friends. I hoped I was wrong about him, and I hoped your mother was smart enough to see through him on her own. But she didn't? No, she didn't. I looked at my daughter, so grown up at 18, dealing with adult problems she shouldn't have to face. Maddie, I need you to know that whatever happens between your mother and me, it's not your fault and it's not your responsibility to fix it. I know, but I feel like I made things worse by taking her side all the time. You were being loyal to your mother. That's not a bad thing, even when she was wrong. Maddie was quiet for a moment, then said, Are you going to fight for your marriage? I'm going to fight for what's right, but I'm not going to beg your mother to love and respect me. Either she does or she doesn't. And if she doesn't? Then you and I will be fine on our own. After Maddie left for school, I spent the morning in the workshop, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of sanding and measuring and cutting. But my mind kept wandering to the conversation I needed to have with Talia when she finally decided to come downstairs. Around noon, I heard her moving around in the kitchen. I gave her time to get some coffee and collect herself, then went upstairs to face whatever came next. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, her hair unwashed, her face puffy from crying. She looked up when I came in, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen in years. Genuine vulnerability. I called in sick to work, she said. Good, we need to talk. I know. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit, please. I sat down, but kept my distance, my hands folded on the table between us. I'm sorry, she said. I know that's not enough, but I need to start somewhere. Sorry for what, specifically? She flinched at my tone, but answered honestly. For the affair, for lying to you, for making you think you were the problem in our marriage, for what I said about your name, your work, your family legacy, and for involving Maddie, for poisoning her against you. That was unforgivable. I nodded. It was, but it's not the worst thing you did. What was the worst thing? You gave up on us without even trying to fix what was wrong. You decided I wasn't good enough for the life you wanted, so instead of talking to me about it, you went looking for someone who could give you more. Talia's eyes filled with tears again. I felt invisible, Elias. Like I was just the furniture maker's wife. Like my dreams and ambitions didn't matter as long as you were happy in your workshop. Your dreams matter. They've always mattered. But you never told me you were unhappy. You never said you wanted something different. You just started pulling away and criticizing everything about our life together. I tried to talk to you. No, you complained. There's a difference. You complained about the house, the neighborhood, the cars, my work, my family, my friends. But you never once said, Elias, I'm not happy and I need us to make some changes together. She was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I handled it all wrong. You handled it like a coward, and you handled it like someone who had already decided I wasn't worth fighting for. That's not true, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you decided our marriage was over months ago. You just didn't bother to tell me. Talia stood up and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. "What do you want me to say, Elias? That I made a mistake? I did. That I hurt you and Maddie? I did. That I was stupid to believe Drew's lies? I was. I want you to tell me the truth. Do you love me, or do you love the security I provide?" "I love you. Do you respect me?" She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I want to respect you," she said finally. "But you don't. You're embarrassed by my work, my background, my family name. You think I lack ambition because I'm satisfied building things with my hands instead of chasing get-rich-quick schemes like Drew. I think," she turned around to face me, "I think I got caught up in wanting more than we have instead of appreciating what we've built together. And now? Now I realize that what we've built is real. It's solid. It's lasted 15 years, and it could last 50 more if we both want it to." I studied her face, looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation. "What about Drew?" "Drew was a fantasy. A stupid, selfish fantasy that almost cost me everything that actually matters. He was also a criminal who targeted you specifically because he thought you were unhappy enough to be manipulated. I know, I see that now. Do you? Because last night you were ready to leave me for him. You were ready to break up our family for a man you barely knew. I wasn't going to leave you. You were meeting him at hotels, Talia. You bought him gifts with our money. You were making plans for a future that didn't include me." She sat back down, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're right, I was. And I don't know how to take that back. You can't take it back, but you can decide what you want to do going forward. I want to fix this. I want to save our marriage. Why? Because I love you, because you're a good man and a good father, and I was an idiot to take that for granted. And because Drew turned out to be a fraud." She nodded reluctantly. "That too. But Elias, even if Drew had been everything he claimed to be, what I did was wrong. I know that now." I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, needing some distance to think clearly. "Talia, I've been awake all night trying to figure out if there's a way to rebuild trust after something like this. And I keep coming back to the same question. Which is, if you could do it all over again, knowing what you know now about Drew, would you still have had the affair? No, of course not. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you would still have been tempted. If another Drew came along, someone who seemed successful and ambitious and could offer you the life you think you want, would you be able to resist?" The question hung in the air between us. Talia opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. "I don't know," she said finally. "I want to say yes, but I don't know if you'd believe me." "I wouldn't, because the problem isn't Drew. The problem is that you're fundamentally unhappy with the life we've built together. And until that changes, there's always going to be another Drew waiting to take advantage of that unhappiness. So what do we do?" I turned around to face her. "We figure out if you can learn to be happy with who I am and what I do for a living. And I figure out if I can trust you not to go looking for something better the next time you get restless." "How do we do that?" "Honestly, I have no idea, but I know where we start." "Where?" "You move out of our bedroom and into the guest room. You close all the joint bank accounts and credit cards. You give me access to your phone, your email, your social media accounts, and you start marriage counseling alone first, then together if the counselor thinks there's something worth saving. Elias, I'm not done. You also apologize to Maddie for putting her in the middle of our problems. You apologize to my family for embarrassing them. And you figure out a way to rebuild your relationship with your daughter that doesn't involve turning her against me. Anything else? Yes. You decide if you can live with being married to a man named Grant who works with his hands and takes pride in his family's legacy. Because I'm not changing who I am to make you feel better about your choices." Talia was crying again, but she nodded. "Okay, I'll do all of that. We'll see. You don't believe me. I don't trust you. There's a difference. Trust has to be earned back, and that's going to take time." "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe months. Maybe years. Maybe never. And if I can't earn it back, then we get divorced, and you can go find someone whose last name doesn't embarrass you at client events." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she doubled over like she was in pain. "I deserve that," she whispered. "Yes, you did." My phone buzzed with a text message from Drew. "We need to talk. Meet me at Murphy's at 3 p.m. I showed the message to Talia. "Looks like your boyfriend wants to have a conversation." "He's not my boyfriend. What should I tell him?" "Tell him to stay away from our family." That's what I told him last night. Apparently he didn't listen. I typed back, "No, stay away from my family or I call your probation officer." His response came immediately. You don't understand the situation. I can make things very difficult for you. I showed that message to Talia, too. What do you think he means by that? Her face went pale. I don't know, but Elias, maybe you shouldn't antagonize him. If he's really a criminal, he's a con man, not a mobster. The only power he has is the power people give him by being afraid of him. But as I typed back a response telling Drew exactly where he could go with his threats, I wondered if I was underestimating just how desperate and dangerous a cornered con man could be. Drew's response to my text came an hour later, and it wasn't what I expected. Check your email. I opened my laptop and found a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Interesting photos." Inside were a dozen pictures of me from the past few weeks, coming out of my workshop late at night, having coffee with Sarah Martinez from the hardware store, talking to Jennifer Walsh at the bank. The photos were taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but they were clear enough to tell a story if someone wanted to spin one. The message that accompanied them was short. Looks like you've been keeping busy while your wife was working late. I wonder what Talia would think about these cozy conversations with other women. Maybe we should all meet and discuss this like adults. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then started laughing. It was a bitter, angry sound that brought Talia running from the kitchen. What's wrong? She asked. I turned the laptop around so she could see the photos. Your boyfriend is trying to blackmail me. She looked at the pictures, her face confused. I don't understand. These just show you talking to people. Exactly. But Drew thinks he can make them look like something more. He's trying to create a false equivalency, make it seem like I was having affairs, too, so your betrayal doesn't look as bad. But you weren't. Of course I wasn't. Sarah Martinez sold me the hardware for Maddie's rocking chair. Jennifer Walsh was helping me set up a separate bank account after I found out about your hotel charges. But Drew is betting that you'll believe the worst about me, just like you believed the best about him. Talia sat down heavily in the chair next to me. What does he want? He wants to meet, all three of us together. Probably thinks he can manipulate the situation, make himself look like the reasonable one while painting me as a hypocrite. Are you going to meet with him? Oh, I'm definitely going to meet with him, but not the way he expects. I picked up my phone and called my brother Mike in Portland. He answered on the second ring. Elias, how are you holding up? I'm fine, but I need a favor. How quickly can you get here? I can be on a plane tonight if you need me. What's going on? Remember how you always said you wanted to meet the guy who broke up my marriage? Yeah. Well, he wants to meet too, and I think it's time we accommodated him. Mike was quiet for a moment. Elias, you're not planning to do anything stupid, are you? Define stupid. Anything that would land you in jail. No jail time, I promise. But Drew needs to learn that there are consequences for messing with the Grant family. I'll be there tomorrow morning. After I hung up, Talia was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. What are you planning? I'm planning to give Drew exactly what he asked for, a meeting where we can discuss this situation like adults. Elias, please don't do anything that will make things worse. Worse than my wife having an affair with a con man who's now trying to blackmail me? I'm not sure how much worse things can get. He could go to the police. He could tell people that you threatened him. Let him. I've got a clean record, a solid reputation in this community, and a business that's been operating honestly for 15 years. What's he got? A criminal record, a history of fraud, and a probation officer who's very interested in his current activities. I stood up and headed toward the workshop. I'm going to finish Maddie's rocking chair. When she gets home from school, tell her I want to talk to her. About what? About the difference between people who build things and people who tear them down. That evening, after Maddie got home and we'd had a long conversation about integrity, family loyalty, and the importance of standing up to bullies, I sent Drew a text. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Murphy's Diner. Come alone. His response was immediate. Bring Talia. No, this is between you and me now. Then no deal. I want all three of us there, or I start sharing those photos with your neighbors and your customers. I showed the exchange to Maddie, who was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. She read it and shook her head. Dad, he's not very smart, is he? Why do you say that? Because he's threatening to show people pictures of you talking to other people. That's not exactly scandalous behavior. No, but he's hoping people will assume the worst. Small-town gossip can be very damaging, even when it's based on lies. So what are you going to do? I'm going to give him what he wants, a public meeting where we can all discuss the situation openly. That sounds dangerous? Not the way I'm planning it. The next morning, Mike arrived on the early flight from Portland. He was 2 years younger than me, but he'd spent 10 years in the Army and had the kind of presence that made people think twice about starting trouble. He was also smart, loyal, and had a talent for seeing through people's lies. "So," he said as we sat in my workshop drinking coffee, "tell me about this Drew character." I filled him in on everything: the affair, the criminal background, the blackmail attempt, the meeting planned for this afternoon. "And you want me there because?" "Because I want witnesses, reliable witnesses who can testify to exactly what was said and done if this goes sideways." "You think he's going to try something?" "I think he's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things." "What about Talia? Is she really going to show up and face both of you?" "She doesn't have a choice. If she doesn't show up, Drew will spin it as proof that she's afraid of the truth coming out. If she does show up, she has to choose sides publicly." "And you think she'll choose you?" "I think she'll choose what's right. Whether that's me or not remains to be seen." At 1:45 p.m., Mike and I walked into Murphy's Diner. The lunch crowd had cleared out, leaving only a few truckers and the usual afternoon coffee drinkers. I'd called ahead and spoken to the manager, explaining that there might be some raised voices, but nothing violent. He'd agreed to let us use the back booth and to keep an eye on things. Drew was already there, sitting in the same booth where I'd confronted him and Talia 2 nights earlier. He was wearing another expensive suit and had his phone on the table, probably recording the conversation. "Elias," he said as we approached, "I see you brought backup." "This is my brother Mike. He's here to make sure everyone behaves like civilized adults." Drew looked Mike up and down, taking in the military bearing and the steady gaze. "I don't think we need... I think we do." I slid into the booth across from him, and Mike sat next to me. "Where's Talia?" "She'll be here. She's just nervous about seeing you." "She lives with me, Drew. She sees me every day." "She's nervous about the confrontation, about having to choose between us." Mike leaned forward slightly. "Is that what you think this is about? Her choosing between you and my brother?" "Isn't it?" "No," I said. "This is about you trying to blackmail me with fake evidence of affairs that never happened. This is about you being a convicted con man who violated his probation by targeting married women for financial gain." Drew's confident expression flickered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. I called your probation officer yesterday. Turns out he's very interested in your recent activities, especially the part where you've been using false identities to lease cars and apartments. You can't prove... I can prove everything. Bank records, hotel receipts, phone records, all of it traceable back to you and your various aliases." The diner door opened, and Talia walked in. She looked terrible, pale, exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She saw us in the back booth and hesitated, then walked slowly toward us. "Talia," Drew said, standing up, "I'm so glad you came." She didn't look at him. Instead, she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry I'm late. I was meeting with a divorce attorney." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. "What?" Drew said. "I filed for divorce this morning," Talia said, still looking at me. "I wanted to tell you before you heard it from someone else." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. "I see." "Wait," Drew said, his voice rising. "Talia, we talked about this. We agreed that you were going to work things out with Elias, that we were going to take things slow." "We never agreed to anything," Talia said, finally turning to look at him. "You made assumptions. You made promises you couldn't keep. You lied to me about everything. Your business, your background, your intentions. I never lied about my feelings for you." "Your feelings?" Talia's voice was getting louder now, and other customers were starting to stare. "Drew, you don't even know me. You know what you thought you could get from me. Access to my husband's business, our joint bank accounts, our house. That's not true, isn't it? Because I did some research of my own after Tuesday night. I found out about your previous wives, your criminal record, your debts. I found out that you've been running the same con in 3 different states." Drew was looking back and forth between Talia and me like he couldn't understand what was happening. "But the photos, the evidence of Elias's affairs? You mean the pictures of my husband talking to the hardware store clerk and the bank manager?" Talia laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Drew, I may have been stupid enough to fall for your lies, but I'm not stupid enough to fall for your blackmail scheme." "This is all his doing," Drew said, pointing at me. "He's been poisoning you against me, making you think. He didn't have to poison me against you. You did that yourself when I found out everything you told me was a lie." Mike was watching this exchange with fascination. "So if you're getting divorced," he said to Talia, "why are you defending my brother?" Talia sat down next to Drew, but she was still looking at me. "Because he deserves better than what I gave him. Because he's a good man who worked hard to build a life for his family, and I threw it away for a fantasy." "But you're still divorcing him," Drew said, hope creeping back into his voice. "Yes, because I can't undo what I did. I can't rebuild the trust I broke, and I can't ask him to stay married to someone who was ready to abandon him for the first smooth-talking stranger who came along. So, you're free, Drew said. We can be together. Drew, I wouldn't be with you if you were the last man on earth. You're a liar, a cheat, and a criminal. You targeted me because you thought I was weak and gullible enough to be manipulated. It's exactly what you did. And now you're trying to blackmail my husband with fake evidence because your original plan didn't work out. Drew was starting to look panicked. Talia, you're making a mistake. Elias has been investigating me, lying about me. Elias has been telling the truth about you. Everything he said was true. You are on probation. You do owe back taxes. You have been married before, and you did defraud investors. But I love you. No, you don't. You love what you thought you could get from me, but there's nothing here for you anymore. Drew turned to me, his desperation now obvious. This is all your fault. If I hadn't interfered, you would have successfully conned my wife out of her share of our assets and then disappeared, just like you did to your previous victims. Drew, Mike interrupted. I think it's time for you to leave. You can't make me. Actually, we can. I pulled out my phone and showed him a text message. That's from your probation officer. He's very interested in meeting with you to discuss your recent activities. In fact, he's waiting outside right now. Drew's face went white. He looked toward the diner's front window and saw a man in a suit standing next to a government sedan. You called my P.O.? I called him yesterday. Told him about your blackmail scheme, your false identities, your attempts to defraud a married couple. He's been looking for a reason to violate your probation. Drew stood up so quickly he knocked over his coffee cup. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Talia said quietly. It's completely over. We watched as Drew walked toward the front of the diner, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Through the window, we could see him talking to the probation officer, then getting into the back seat of the government car. The diner was quiet, except for the soft murmur of conversation from the other customers and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Well, Mike said finally, that was anticlimactic. Talia was crying again, but quietly this time. I'm sorry, she said to me. I'm sorry for all of it. I know you are. Do you hate me? I thought about the question for a long moment. No, I'm angry, and I'm hurt, and I'm disappointed, but I don't hate you. Will you fight the divorce? No. You're right that the trust is broken. Maybe it could be rebuilt over time, but that would require both of us wanting to do the work, and I don't think you do. I don't know what I want anymore. That's why the divorce is the right choice. You need time to figure out who you are and what you really want from life, and I need time to figure out if I can forgive what you did. And Maddie? Maddie will be fine. She's 18, she's smart, and she knows both of her parents love her. We'll work out custody and support arrangements that put her needs first. Talia nodded and wiped her eyes. The attorney says the process should be fairly straightforward, since we're both being reasonable about it. Good. Elias? Yeah? For what it's worth, I never thought your last name was cheap. I was just angry and looking for ways to justify what I was doing. I know. And your work, your family legacy, the workshop, I was wrong to dismiss all of that. What you do matters. What you build lasts. I know that too. She stood up to leave, then turned back one more time. Will you tell Maddie that I love her? That none of this was her fault? She already knows, but I'll tell her again. After Talia left, Mike and I sat in the booth for a while, watching the afternoon traffic through the diner window. So, Mike said, how do you feel? Tired, sad, but also relieved, I think. Relieved. The uncertainty is over. I know where I stand now. I know what I'm dealing with. And what's that? Starting over at 41. Building a new life for Maddie and me. Figuring out what comes next. You'll be fine, Mike said. The Grant name has survived worse than this. Yeah, it has. Besides, you've got something Drew never had. What's that? You know how to build things that last. 6 months later, I was putting the finishing touches on a custom dining room set for a client in the next town over when Maddie came into the workshop carrying 2 cups of coffee and a manila envelope. Mail came, she said, setting the coffee down on my workbench. I opened the envelope and found the final divorce decree, signed by a judge and officially ending my 15-year marriage to Talia. I looked at it for a moment, then set it aside and picked up my coffee. How do you feel? Maddie asked. Free, I said, and realized I meant it. Good, because I have some news. What kind of news? The good kind. I got into the art program at State University. Full scholarship. I set down my coffee and hugged my daughter. That's fantastic. I'm so proud of you. They were impressed by my portfolio, especially the photos of your furniture. Apparently, documenting traditional craftsmanship is considered very relevant to contemporary art studies. So your old man's cheap work is good for something after all. Dad, stop. You know I never thought that. I know, I'm just giving you a hard time. Actually, there's something else. The scholarship is named after a local family that's been supporting the arts for generations. Guess what family that is? I looked at her suspiciously. I have no idea. The Grant family. Apparently your great-grandfather donated money to establish the program back in the 1950s. I stared at her. Seriously? Seriously. The scholarship coordinator wants to meet with you about expanding the program. Something about showcasing traditional crafts as contemporary art. Well, I'll be damned. Language, Dad. Sorry, I'll be darned. Maddie laughed. So it turns out the Grant name isn't just not cheap, it's actually worth something in the academic world. Who knew? Great-grandpa knew. He just never got the credit he deserved. I looked around the workshop, at the tools and workbenches and half-finished projects that represented 4 generations of Grant craftsmanship. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. You know what? I said to Maddie. I think it's time to expand this operation. Maybe teach some classes, take on an apprentice or two, pass on what I know to the next generation. That sounds perfect, Dad. Yeah, it does. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Patterson talking to someone in her front yard, probably spreading the latest neighborhood gossip. But for once, I didn't care what she was saying about the Grant family. We'd weathered worse storms than a cheating wife and a con man, and we'd come out stronger on the other side. The Grant name had survived another generation, and it would survive many more. And that was worth more than all the Teslas and expensive suits in the world.